we will receive that from the state?
That's an excellent question. So the special ed fund is Fund 130. That's actually under the umbrella of the general fund. Even though 110 is our main fund, so it is part of the general fund. There's always money in every district has to put money from the general fund to support special ed. There's never enough. That's always been an issue, right? They never fully fund it. We've gotten a lot better, the state and some of the categoricals, to get it close to fully funded. But yeah, so we need to make sure that people, so if somebody's not an eligible cost, but it's still a necessary service that we have to do for students, we just won't get reimbursed for that cost. That's no different than regular ed students. But I don't know of many cases like that. I do know that certain costs like audit, things like that aren't eligible costs, but I think for the most part, our teacher costs are fine. I don't think there's an issue with that.
When we received some data a month ago, they said that like $385,000 wasn't billed.
Medicaid.
Medicaid, yeah. So does that mean that, and it would have to be done within 30 days or something? We had exceeded that, correct me if I'm wrong. So does that mean that we won't get reimbursed for that $385,000, or will we? Please,
So,
you know.
it's the Medicaid, and you have to submit your billing on a monthly basis. The ISD monitors it. It has been a challenge for many years. We did have it corrected, and we had to do a corrective action plan. So we were on target. But you must continue to stay with your systems and processes with that Medicaid billing, because if you don't, it could potentially be a loss in funding around that Medicaid, which could be the $385,000, which could potentially be a hit on the general fund. But the ISD does not want you to lose those dollars. Dr. Leverett has done a great job in negotiating and talking to them to get extra time and extensions to get that resolved. But right now, I think it's like a $285,000 issue, and they are working through it to get those Medicaid billings up to par. But you all were behind and out of compliance.
Just a couple federal revenue questions. Again, any potential changes? We just talked about that earlier. We're not sure how that's going to play out. And then again, I mentioned before about draw requests, making sure they're properly documented and done in a timely manner. And I'm going to mention that when it comes to developing a budget, because that one item can be an issue with trying to figure out where the budget's going to end up. So other items, we have $5.1 million from the Oakland ISD for special education reimbursement. Again, that's another bucket that we get reimbursed for. It's a big pile of money that they divvy out to 28 districts based on their spending, and there's a certain formula they use. And then Medicaid, I just brought that up, but traditionally it was in that range of 150 to 330 in prior years.
Question. What is the usage of that $5 million annually as it pertains to special?
It's a full reimbursement of our costs. So it's just helping to reimburse.
Transportation, physical therapy, speech, just the needs for.
How about parapro?
I don't.
Parapro salaries?
Probably
Anybody's salaries?
Anything in special ed.
Anything within that is the salaries also part of that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yes.
Thank you.
So other revenue questions, are there any changes in the amount of tuition paid? We do pay for dual enrollment. We have to track that. We also transport students. We have homeless transportation, things like that. Those numbers sometimes change quite a bit. We do get some money back with that. The PA-18 distribution, sometimes if the county has extra money, they'll give you a supplemental payment, which is great, but you don't want to count on that happening the next year, so you need to make sure when you're budgeting that you treat that as one-time money. And then with the Medicaid eligibility, we talked about that. So special revenue funds, so food service, primarily we get money from the federal food free and reduced program. We get some state monies, but primarily it's the free and reduced program. Student activity, again, this is, in each building has their own student activity account. The money's usually generated by fundraisers, donations, that type of thing. It's not a lot of money, because there's a lot of different student activity accounts that make up that 97,000 or so. So food service, big question, are we capturing the data for all meals served? That was a challenge here. I know when I was here, we had technology issues, we had staffing issues. There were constantly 5, 6, 7 food service workers short. It's hard to make sure you're counting Johnny and Debbie every time they go through when you're trying to get meals served. So I know technology was added to hopefully help that. That is something that needs to diligently be asked to make sure that we're capturing every student that's eligible. And what can be done to improve participation? You know, trying to, and I know different food service managers have gimmicks that they use to get kids excited. I know they all try their best for that.
What would be your recommendation to have food service come in and give us updates on how to do it? How often and when?
Well, I think they used to do it once a year, and I would encourage have them present.
Have they?
They did it twice a year.
Oh, okay.
It used to be twice a year, right? Have they done it yet?
We're not seeing nothing.
Right, right. That's what I'm saying. We have to get back on that. Because we haven't seen it. I know we were doing it twice a year. Okay. I don't think we have a presentation. I don't think we had a presentation since the new board members have been here.
No, yes, that's correct.
They've not been here since then. I mean,
No,
they've
no,
not
they
been
have
here.
not been in January.
Just an update, that's it.
Yep. And then within student activity, there's actually mini balances. Each school has their carryover from the year before. So that makes up the money in the overall fund. And we make sure that each student activity account has a positive fund balance, positive cash balance in their individual accounts. So bond debt funds, and this is for bond 2020. This is to pay the debt for the money we borrowed from the bondholders. We tax our taxpayers 2 mills annually to pay this debt. We promised them it wouldn't go beyond 2 mills. It continues to be at 2 mills. And we're actually adding on the third debt, I think, coming up, which will be debt fund 325. And again, there's money within the 2 mills to cover all three funds. So that's good information.
Bond 2020, is that just a bond name or is that representing the year 2020?
That was the legal name for the $147 million bond issue, was bond 2020. But then we borrowed it in 3 installments. And this is a third and final installment for that.
But that was the year,
2020,
2020.
right before COVID, a week before. So this is looking at, again, how much is generated, the 2 mills by municipality. It's not necessarily important, but it kind of shows you who pays the largest chunks towards those 2 mills. And this is important. This is, school districts have to be strategic sometimes, and you are allowed to have a fund balance in your debt funds. You're allowed to do that. You can't like exceed double it or something like that, but you can have a fund balance. And what you see in a lot of districts, you'll probably see it this year, half dozen. You're going to get a $50 million bond issue with no increase in the rate. I mean, that is verbatim. That's what districts do. And the way they're able to do that is they kind of build up that fund balance and they start paying off some of the old debt so they can take on some new debt and maintain that debt level. Versus if you reduced it to just what you needed and you went for that $50 million election, now it's going to be a tax increase because and people have short memories. They won't remember that it was 2 mills, now it's 1.7 mills, and you're asking to go back up to 2 mills. They just see here a tax increase. So that is in long-term planning that districts do that. And you got to be reasonable about it. You can't build a massive fund balance, but it is a way to structure it. And also the taxpayers are used to it, right? They're used to paying the same amount versus going up and down all the time. So the debt fund, are there adequate dollars to pay for the payments? And we usually pay an interest-only payment in November, and May is interest and principal. So those are when those come due. Sometimes, we're not in that situation now, but there are times when interest rates drop so much that we can actually refinance, like your mortgage, refinance our bonds and save money. Usually the financial consultants will knock on your door first because they all do these analyses, but it's always good to keep an eye out for that. And probably over my career, probably 50 million was saved doing refundings. I mean, it can be significant money if you just keep an eye on that. Did you have the hearing for the tax rate? And again, is the fund balance reasonable? Capital project fund, we have the 0.80 sinking fund has been a little bit reduced to 0.798 because of what they call the Headley rollback. This is the last year it's going to be levied this summer. The board needs to adopt a new sinking fund before December 31st in order to call it a renewal. And of course, it's very important to call stuff a renewal because if you say tax increase, you probably got a larger no vote, right? So there's plenty of time for that. Just as a heads up, this likely would go on the November ballot to renew that sinking fund.
So that's kind of when your PR needs to start putting signs back, renewals around the city and some type of explanation. Dr. Leverett can do like a podcast to explain what that means, a renewal versus an increase. And you don't want to miss that target. So kind of not as big as a bond going out for a bond or a sinking fund, but a renewal is what is needed, and most communities go through that. How often do you have to do that?
Well, it depends. This was a 5-year millage.
Okay.
You can go for a longer millage. Sometimes, though, you may get a stronger no vote because people don't want to be locked up for 20 years. So it's really kind of testing the room, reading the room, and figuring out, can we go for longer than 5 years? Because it's nice to not have to worry about going back again. So that would be a decision the board will need to make.
You said it needs to be done by December? No.
By December 31, but the only election, there's an election in August, which I don't think is doable at this point, and then there's a general election in November. The state does allow for, I think, four election dates a year. You have to choose one of those 4. So there's 2.
We should do it in November, is what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I don't think we could. I don't think you can do it in August. I don't think.
We'd have to get the stuff in there by May.
Yeah, it'd be real tight.
Yeah, so November.
And it might be a little cheaper to do a November election because if there's other stuff already, we won't have to pay as much for election costs. So November might be cheaper than August. So a big thing with sinking funds, and I'll probably mention this again later, is versus bond funds, sinking funds can be used to pay for repairs. That's very important. And you might remember that in some of our discussions, we're going to use the majority of the sinking fund to support the bond issue, but we wanted to make sure we set aside $500,000 a year for repairs because a bond can't pay for repairs. So there is money in the sinking fund that, again, should be used for that purpose to finish out these projects. Are we investing as much as possible? Again, we do that. It's being done weekly, and I've been involved recently with that just to make sure that's happening. And then, we talked about the November. And this just shows where the sinking fund amount is on this 4029. So it just shows you where it is on that chart. So for bond series 1 and 2, and that was combined with the last audit, basically series 1 was wound up. And so there's a little bit, and they just combined those 2 funds with the audit, which is fine. So again, the money come from bond proceeds is used to fund the projects. There's a little bit of money in interest earnings. Occasionally we got some E-rate money back, some rebates, stuff like that, but primarily it's that sale of that big chunk of money up front. So as I mentioned, after the first year, there's not a lot of money coming in, except your interest and that type of thing. And really, capital project fund, it's really a multi-year project. So even though we divide it up into years for you guys, it really is best to view it as an overall project, multi-year project, and to make sure that we're on track for that. And again, once we sell the bonds here, we'll have a new capital fund, which can be used to fund the remaining projects on the docket. So this is just something as a general template for coming up with a bond issue. Normally there's a needs assessment that's done. You work with a financial advisor to develop an amortization schedule to figure out how much the millage will be needed. You try to do as much as you can without raising the rate as you can. You have to get Treasury approval. You have to go through the election process and get authorizations. And then if you're successful, then you would sell the bond. There's a lot of legal work that has to be done prior to selling the bond that we're actually in the middle of right now, that I'm coming in late in the game, but I'm hoping to make sure the official statement's done and that type of thing. We have a meeting tomorrow on that. So, very, common sense, is there enough dollars to cover the projects? Are you investing it as much as you can? And are you making sure that you've tried to get all the rebates you can get on some of your projects, which I know Bill Hoagland's very good at getting rebates back for some of the energy efficiencies. So you want to make sure you continue to do that type of thing.
And DTE, that's another one. Your consumers in DTE, as well as interest rates. You want to look at how much interest you have collected over one annual cycle of the year, because that helps with your general fund as well. A lot of people don't talk about that interest rate when those dollars are sitting there, but you want to see how much you're generating in your interest every year.
And then you can see the box or the circle for the debt is there on that tax-free form. Risk-related fund. This is a separate fund that is used to pay our property and casualty insurance, workers' compensation, unemployment. It's kind of carved out of the general fund just to keep those costs highlighted. It's something the district decided to do years ago. But the funding for that comes from the general fund. Money is sent over from 110 to 810. It did not happen last year. Don't know why. But the transfer was not made. It is in the budget this year to be made, and it must be made because there won't be money if it's not made. So I can't speak to the circumstances, but there's about $200,000 left. But I think about $700,000 or so was used up because there wasn't a transfer made last year for the Fund 810. Risk-related questions, and you want to make sure what you show in the general fund is sending out. You show it coming in the risk-related fund, and then is there enough money in those funds, in that fund, to cover the expected costs? If there are layoffs, your unemployment's going to go up. You want to make sure you account for that in a cost savings. I don't know if that's on the. I have not seen a list, so I don't know if that's on there. But
Question.
yeah.
Okay. I didn't know this. It's not my turn to speak on this, but I am, because that's highly important. You made a statement that it appears that it just went over the head of this board as it pertains to those funds not being transferred into the risk funds, because that was my concern. If you have multiple layoffs, which incorporates unemployment, and the payments were not sent, how do you pay unemployment? Here's my thing. You can't answer this, but Dr. Leverett can. Why wasn't it transferred? How much of it should have been transferred? How do we rectify this problem? And how do we deal with the rationale reasoning why it was not transferred? Because we're in a serious situation now. That's a lot of money. So I don't want to look at it. I need an answer.
Well, thankfully the money transferred every year was a little bit more than was spent. So we built up a little bit of fund balance from 810. So thankfully there is money to cover it. The answer is you as a board approved the budget that showed the transfer happening. So it's not a board issue. That's a job of the CFO to make sure
there's the answer.
that is transferred.
There's the answer.
And who's responsible for the CFO?
You know, yeah. But this is what I'm saying. And so, this would affect this district if those specific things like that are overlooked or not done. Am I right? I'm just speaking to myself.
Absolutely, especially
Yeah.
where we are now, with the budget and the climate, with the,
Absolutely.
uncertainties with what's coming down
Absolutely.
from the state and from federal. In my opinion, from what I'm hearing, it would definitely affect this district. Being that we have to potentially get rid of some positions. So yes, yes, that is correct.
So mine is, I'm holding us responsible too, because I guess we just got used to whatever's put across the table. We look at it and didn't even look at it specifically.
Right.
Because now, this is biting us, because now we have to look at layoffs.
I don't think it has anything to do with layoffs.
No, but the money's in there, but no, hear what I'm saying.
No.
You lay someone off,
Mm-hmm.
you have to provide unemployment.
100%, yes.
So it does affect what people are getting paid if they're laid off.
The people, yes,
The people.
yes.
You can't pay them if the money ain't there.
Well, no, the money is potentially there, correct?
There's about $200,000 left in that
And you
fund.
said you need $750. You mentioned the word $750, $700,000.
I mentioned that the fund balance went down from about $900,000 to $200,000. There was $900,000 sitting in Fund 810. Since money wasn't transferred from last year, it ate up $700,000 of that. So if it wasn't in the budget this year, we'd have a whole different conversation. It was missed last year. It's in the budget, so you're safe going forward.
Right.
It just didn't happen last year. I can't tell you why, but that's why I have in here questions to ask. And
So-
part of this is to make sure those
So it's
ask
been
those
corrected,
questions.
trustee.
No, I know it's been correct, but here's where I'm going, okay, because I need to get a clear understanding of this. This specific risk-related fund takes care of unemployment, work insurances, all right?
Just property and casualty insurance.
Right? If the money wasn't transferred, right?
Right.
What was paid out of it then? How was it being paid if there was no money in there because the money wasn't transferred?
There was
It was still within the general fund.
There was $900,000 in that fund.
In the risk fund,
Yes,
and it dropped it down to 2?
yes.
How?
Because nothing was added.
No. What was the spent? What? Okay, what was the $700,000 going to?
From what I'm hearing, tell me if I'm wrong, is that, okay, we have the $900,000, so in the course of that year, we spent $700,000 in
On-
various things, workers' comp.
Oh, we did. That's what I'm saying. Okay,
Right.
so there's
Now we're at 200 because nothing else was added to it, so now we're only at 200,000
Yes.
for this year.
Correct.
Right.
It should have been,
Historically, we had, I think, $500,000 a year, Jim, is that it?
About close to $1 million.
yeah.
a year,
No, just total carryover that carried over year after year.
Yeah.
so there's always at least $1 million in this, what you're saying.
Close to,
Close to $1 million,
700,000, yeah.
But now we're at 200.
yes. But, I'm not trying to diminish this, but most districts do not have this fund.
No,
So you can look at it like we have a $200,000 cushion that other districts don't have. Now, it's not $900,000, but it's still a cushion. All I'm saying is when you have a list of potential layoffs, you have to make sure you reduce the unemployment cost potentially, because we have likely
because we
to pay
had that
out.
risk fund.
Mhm.
Look, and just for historical perspective, and I think Jim was here when we started with this related fund.
No, it's before me.
Okay, so yeah, so I was here. What happened is, we had insurance through Middle Cities Risk Management Trust for years. We were founding members of Middle Cities. We got kicked out of Middle Cities back
Yeah.
in 2014, 15, because we had so many large claims regarding some of our closed buildings. So as a result of that, we weren't insured by Middle Cities Risk Management Trust, yet we still had to have insurance. So what we did is we went out to the commercial market. Middle Cities is 4 school districts. We went out to the commercial market to get insurance, and we paid through the nose.
Yes.
And we had an incredibly high deductible. And so we said, let's do Bob Moore. Bob Moore's local school said, well, let's set up a separate fund, a rainy day fund, because our deductible was so high, we needed to have some money set aside for the pain claim. Claim pay. So that's why we had such a large, risk-related fund, and that's why we have that fund. That's why Jim said most school districts don't have that, because most school districts have a set setting or Middle Cities to be behind them if they get a large claim. So, and we've just carried this over for years, despite the fact that we are now with set setting, we don't have as much of an exposure, but it's nice to have that fund, in case things happen.
Right.
So hopefully they get some.
No, I understand, I'm just saying.
It's almost like a little rainy day fund.
Yeah, yeah, and hear what I'm saying. If we've been doing it since before he came, what happened for it not to be done this time?
Well, you all did have it in the budget. If you did.
To be transferred over.
But the CFO.
I need you to say that.
Yes. Yes, the CFO did not do.
I need you to say that out loud. That's why I'm asking. I know what the answer is.
Yeah.
But I need you all to hear this together. Because there's specific things that we're dealing with, and these are the reasons why.
So everyone did, on this diet, you all did the right thing, seeing that it was there, but then it was him to do his due diligence to make sure that the fund, it was funded. And that was not, that's the part that was not done.
Thank you.
Sir, I forgot your name.
Jim,
Mr. Jim. So, you as the money man, I'm gonna say, with all due respect, there are not checks and balances to ensure that policy, procedure, and protocol is followed when you're handling this large amount of money. You're dealing with a multi-million-dollar corporation, and I guess what I'm asking you is, there are scheduled things that should be in place, like, and I'm just gonna throw out, in January, this should happen, February, this should happen. You don't have a schedule like that where we can follow along to see if in fact things are being done and implemented properly, even though it's not technically our job, but is there not something like that in place? A checkoff list, that's what I'll call it, a checkoff list to ensure, hypothetically, I work for you, and you've assigned me to do this project. You're not going to follow to see if I'm doing it? Or should there be some time constraints that Jennifer should have this, and this, X, Y, and Z done? You're not gonna, is it customary, standard that a person, an employee that deals with this kind of money just does what they want and nobody's overseeing them?
well, again, there are, I mentioned earlier, 4,000 account numbers with budgets. There's not enough staff to make sure everything is always done. I mean, this is, to me, if something is large in the budget like that, I will just say it's the CFO's responsibility when they do amendments to make sure that gets transferred. It's when you transfer money to pay payroll. I mean, there's certain things that are just inherent in the job that you do. You could have a checklist 5,000 items long that you can go through, but at some point it still comes down to humans, and humans maybe make mistakes. I can't tell you why it wasn't done. It was clearly in there, but I bring this up to you because, again, I'm transparent. I want you to know there's things that need to be corrected. I've examined things. I'll give my 2 cents and things we can do to change. And this is one thing, and that's why, partly why I'm doing this. So you guys ask the questions, even though you maybe aren't supposed to or shouldn't have to say, hey, did we make that transfer this year in the risk-related fund? I mean, there's probably 30 questions I'm listing here for you maybe to look at and remember. That would be helpful to have that going forward to just double check it. It likely won't happen again. Again, I have thoughts of other reasons why maybe it wasn't done, because it would have made the deficit higher. I don't know. It just wasn't done.
Thank you for your transparency. I mean, the way I operate is give me the good and bad and the ugly and anywhere in between. So I appreciate that personally. So, being that the money was not transferred, but it was in the budget to be transferred, is that money accounted for, or is it now missing somehow?
Good question.
It just means, like I said earlier, it just means that last year was actually a little worse than we thought financially, because if that transfer would have been made, maybe let's call it 700,000, it might be give or take a little bit, then the fund balance would have gone down by another $700,000. So that's the impact of it. But I'm going to talk, if we get to it, hopefully, talk about the difficulty in developing budgets, and there are some big swing numbers that can affect the final audit, the final budget of the year. This shouldn't be, because this should be automatic. It just didn't happen. But there's other things that can come into play, that you might say, how can we be so far off budget? I want to give you guys some background on why some things happen that are outside the business office control that it could affect the audit. So when we get to that.
Yeah, thank you.
And as we're being transparent, in all fairness, when I took on the interim superintendent role, I did not know the budget like the back of my hand. I don't know it like the back of my hand now, but I am more abreast of what to look for. The first year and a half, you have to know curriculum, you have to know budgeting. And so with that being said, in all fairness to Dr. Leverett, she was thrown into the position with no type of transition. She didn't have a gym. I had a Bob Moore. I had a Bob Moore who taught me a real crash course from the ISD, how and what to look for in a budget. And that's where Jim has now been kind of coming in to support that budget side of things for Dr. Leverett. And so, yes, there is a little cheat sheet, and she can use that to say, okay, now, she's just now seeing that cheat sheet. I shared it with her when I came back to say, these are the things you want to look for in this month. This is what you want to bring to the board's attention. These are the presentations, such as the food service you want to have. So it's a crash course for her to get all of this. And with everything else going on in the world, you know, it's a lot coming at her. So just, you know, keep that in mind too. Again, it took me about a year and a half to learn the budget. Thank God I had good budget people alongside, because your team is what really truly matters. And then she can relay that information to you all.
Things are starting to come back to me now. Can I have one more response to that?
Yeah.
We actually had the fund balance up to like 1.2 million. And our auditor said that's too much money in there. So we made a conscious decision to transfer less in a given year to drop that down a little bit. But that was consciously done.
Oh, you're talking about the risk management, not
Yes,
mine.
that was,
Yeah, the
and
risk.
it was part of my amendment to the board, so they knew we were kind of doing that. So there's nothing wrong with drawing it down, as long, you know, like Daryl said, it's really there for emergencies. Nothing wrong with drawing it down, it's just it should be done with full participation of everybody knowing what's going on.
Yes.
That's all. This by itself isn't, again, it's very unique to have that money there. We still have 200,000. We plan on transferring enough so we don't draw that down any further, and hopefully slowly build that back up.
I respect the fact that everybody is a beginner at something until you become advanced, or you're not. My question goes to Dr. Witherspoon. Were you not advising? Are you not hired? Your job primarily is to instruct, advise the interim superintendent?
Yes,
And you didn't help her with the budget?
I advised her and the CFO to have regular meetings with Dr. Leverett and internal staff meetings. Beyond that, I did not monitor their daily meetings or weekly meetings.
But yet you were advising her?
I did.
Okay. Thank you.
One thing, probably everybody knows this, but what takes down a school district is finances. It's not personnel, it's not curriculum, it's finances, right? And I shared honestly with this board, when I think it was in my second or third year, I said, it took me a good year and a half to figure things out. This is a very complex district. And I had 27 years of experience coming in here. So, just for the record, this is very complex. There's a lot involved with it. It takes a while to learn it. That's why continuity is so important.
Mm-hmm.
That's why support is so important. Training ongoing is so important. Going to county meetings to keep up on stuff. But you know, it's not going to be 100%. There's going to be mistakes made. Things are going to be missed. It's just going to happen.
But I respect that.
Yeah.
And I respect that. But here's my thing. Here's my thing. Yes, this district is unique because we had like 3 separate types of funding, right? We had COVID money, ESSER, we had bond, and the basic general money that we get, right? So we're well aware. We know it was going to be difficult to deal with that because of the monies that were generated, that are here, and had to be dealt with, right? But it should not stop you from saying, hey, I'm having difficulty. This is why I haven't given you. You made it clear to us. At our retreat, you're supposed to get financial reports monthly. did, for whatever reason.
And he pushed back, because when I came, he was very, adamant about, he was told by the former.
That's what we heard. Yeah.
Yes.
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 That still doesn't matter.
It does not.
No, that had, because now you have a different executive board, and you still got to do your job.
Mhm.
So that should have been stated. We should have rectified that some time ago. And I'm saying, again, I think we all have a part in this, because we could have demanded more from our superintendent, because we're not seeing it,
Mhm.
right? But it's been, we know what's been said at every meeting. We need a board report, budget.
Mhm.
That's been asked of, we haven't received it. We have to deal with that. But does not stop what needs to be done, because look where we are.
Right.
So I can't accept any excuses of, I don't know. We need to know. If the intent is for this board not to be part of day-to-day, then we have expectations of those who do day-to-day, do their day-to-day job.
Mhm.
You understand where I'm going?
I understand.
I don't want to be held accountable saying, why don't we have this, and this. That's day-to-day.
Right.
But you got to do something, because we're not getting this, and this. This is what we do as a board.
Mhm.
This is what, the budget is what we do. This is serious. He made a serious statement. District faltered, not because of people, but because of finances. Who's in control of the finances? Who makes the decision? 7 entities. 7 entities here. But if we're not getting what we need to make those rational decisions, right?
Right.
We have to make some rational decisions. I don't want to be day to day, Ms. Kelly. I don't. But I'm not going to continue to keep being bombarded on stuff that I had no knowledge of, because it wasn't revealed to me as a board member. And I reiterate what I said before. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm an elected official here, because I don't have the information to do my job.
True.
Well, and I will support, the board should be receiving monthly financial, and I think that's one of the reasons I was brought in to help get caught up. And I would be happy to train the future CFO to make sure that they understand the systems. So again, we're caught up. If we ever get to this full meeting, we'll be caught up through February. I'll start working on March. But I'm leaving in 2 weeks for 5 weeks. So I have 2 weeks to try to do a draft of the budget, the second budget amendment, and next year's budget in 2 weeks. I mean, that's a tall order. But I want to make sure we get as far down the road in that as possible. And I'm going to talk to you about board parameters later, because that's where you come in terms of you giving me feedback for next year.
And I'm going to shut my mouth after this. You said something important. Go right ahead again. You're going to be here for 2 weeks. You leave in 5 weeks to prepare a budget amendment, which is coming up. So what you just said to me, subliminally, he ain't here.
Not here.
And we have not been told why. Always none. Sick. Now you just went 7 weeks ahead. Come on, y'all. That's like, is it somebody at this table know the answer? Because I don't.
Attorney Seegers, did you want to respond? But I will say, Trustee Gross, he is on medical, and in the interim, when Jim is not here, I have talked to a consultant that will be able to take the charge and move forward with all budget aspects for the district.
So now, don't you think that was important for all 7 members of this board to know what's going on with the administration? Because if I'm not mistaken, help me out, I voted on the CFO, so I should know what's going on.
We should know what's going on.
That's 7.
Absolutely.
All I'm asking, man, I'm listening, man. We gotta hold ourselves and people, we gotta hold people responsible.
And Trustee Gross, to answer your question about knowing, I think I read in Dr. Leverett's cabinet updates what was going on. And I know Jim, since that update came out in terms of Jim, what was going on with Pete. But Jim also provided an email to bring us up to speed to let us know what he has been doing and what.
Oh, I read it. You see, I don't want to talk about what we're talking about.
No, I'm talking about.
I read that.
Information. Okay.
He's my, no, that's, okay.
Okay.
All right, okay, let's continue, I'm done. I'm done.
All right. Sorry for my voice here. What's that? Oh, I have water.
Okay.
Oh, I'm not gonna be enough. So now we're gonna move to expenditures. So that was a lot of talk on revenues, so, and good discussion, and that's what this is meant for. Again, same number of funds for expenditures. This is the summary chart that shows the amended budget by different funds in these function categories. So it's very similar to what I showed on the revenue side of things. This also shows it, which is important, I think, to show it by object. And so you see salaries. Salaries are very important to isolate because you should be able to double check that much easier when you have, okay, I know we're hiring more people or we have a pay increase. It should help budgeting by looking at this not only from a function level, but also from an object code, which is salaries and benefits. So it's important to look at the budget in both ways. Thank you so much. So again, the sub-funds, I mentioned function and object code. These are the different areas. Now instruction is primarily classroom instruction. Support, even though support is a big number, support also includes indirect classroom instruction, includes counselors, it includes, if there's media specialists, it includes some support out of the classroom for students. So it's more than just, your traditional definition of support. And the other categories, which is very similar to the revenue side of things. This is the account string. So if you ever to look at a printout of the budget that split it out by account number, this just explains the account string and how it comes into being and what it means. So I won't go through this, but it does show there's a lot involved with all these things. There's a lot of different buckets stuff's in. I talked about the.
Is that something the board should know about, salaries and stuff? Be aware of it? Just a question anybody can answer if they know the answer.
Well, when you adopt the budget, there should be salaries, should be part of the budget. It'll be listed, again, in this form. It should be listed in that form. And so you know what.
Just block, just group?
You'll also receive the line item budget
Okay.
that has every salary, and if you want to go through 4,000 account numbers, they're all in there for it if you want to.
Okay.
So this shows the different function codes. Again, this just is meant to help explain how the budget's developed. If you ever want to refer to this, it just shows the different areas, different buckets of spending. So of course, wages and salaries are our largest portion. Benefits is a very high cost. We actually pay about 42% of every dollar. 42 cents of every dollar has to go to the state of Michigan towards retirement. That's a huge cost for districts. That's supposed to finally go down in like 2038. So if everybody's around in 2038, that cost will be lower.
I hope.
Benefits, we have a PA 152 sets the benefit cap that we're allowed to spend for our staff for single, two-person, full family. So that's set annually by the state of Michigan. And all of our employee groups are at that cap. And then we have all these other areas that are pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through all this stuff. You can see this. So the normal budget process, you'd email department heads showing what their budget is, showing what they've spent so far this year. They would submit a budget request. If there's an increase, they have to explain why. It's kind of really a modified zero-based budgeting approach, and so that's what traditionally what has been done. And then you just go through the process of preparing a budget document internally to go over, make sure there's steps and wage increases, all that kind of thing in the normal budget process. Talk about, this is the formula you guys are all very aware of for the wage calculation. This was a wage calculation. Again, this is for illustration purposes only. This will be updated when we finalize this next year's number, but this is how it's derived.
This is part of the budget you created, that you said, since this
Yes,
is just.
it'll be, once we have all the data, it'll be incorporated. Yes, correct. It's always good to know how many teachers are at the top step, because they'll just have the wage increase for the schedule. And if somebody's on steps, they're gonna get the wage schedule increase, but they'll also get a step increase. And so when you figure out what the cost is to the district, you need to know this to know what you should be budgeting overall for all your salaries. You need to be able to differentiate that.
Do you have basic pie chart or any type of information showing the amount of expenditures we have a year compared to the amount of revenue? Just a basic comparison.
Well, it's in your monthly report that you get monthly, and I have it in here, so we can look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one since, what? Okay, no, I'm just asking.
Yes.
I mean, that makes it simple to look at a pie chart compared to expenditures and revenues.
100%. I'm a visual person. I'd much rather see
I am
something
too,
like that.
because my mind is flowing now, so I understand.
So, and I mentioned earlier the complexities of developing a budget, and this is one of the complexities. We have a lot of vacant positions. How much do you budget for vacant positions? So we got to the point where we budgeted 100% of general fund. We'd add 50% of special ed vacancies, and if we'd add new staff in there. And so this would be a cross-check to look at the budget proposal. Does it equal this separate calculation? Are we within the ballpark? So it's really a check and balance type situation. But it's always difficult to determine what, do you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm doing commentary on my video.
And to add to what Jim said, it's important to always do 100% with your general fund. One of the issues years ago was we were doing 70% of our teaching staff, and we wanted to get up to 100% so that we could say we were doing our due diligence with hiring general fund teachers. We know special education is an area across all states that is a challenge for hiring. So that's why that 50%. So it's kind of like where you are in the state of the state with hiring and teaching staff, but with your general fund, you always want to cover your general fund with 100%. And then you at least want to try to get up to 70% with special ed because most of it is reimbursable. But we know it's a challenge right now with finding special education teachers. So that's why it's still weighted around 50 and 60%. So that's something you want to look for, is your general fund supporting 100% for your core staff.
How does it affect us as it pertains to special ed, not being able to get teachers, keep us in compliance?
That's something you have to keep a pulse on as well. If you fall out of compliance, that can be a knock, as Trustee Miller talked about, with having staff to support your special ed population. So you want to make sure those services such as speech, physical therapy, even if they're not in person, a lot of people are still trying to do it virtual. As long as you can provide the service virtual or in person or outsource it to a company, which is what we've been doing for years because people are just not going into special ed anymore. That's important so you can meet those IEP requests.
Thank you.
To add to the complexity of this, and that's fine to do that, but the question is, okay, what costs are going to go away now? And think of all the ways you cover kids, right? Some of it is paying teachers an overage. Some of it is paying a company an hourly rate. Some of it might be a combination. Some of it might be higher class size. So to do a really good budget, you need to know what that cost is, and that's very difficult to nail down. Because if we fully fund these positions, then we should be reducing some of these other costs in the budget because they will go away. Determining what that is not an easy thing to do. But that is something I'm going to try to do as good of a job as I can on this, because we don't want to have money in there that is unnecessary, as well as we don't want it to be short, right? So that just, again, adds to the complexity of it. Number 6, I did this here in my third year. We didn't have a contract. I put nothing in the budget. No step, no wage increase? Because there isn't a contract, right? How can you put something in a budget that doesn't exist? So, and I did this in my prior district also. It doesn't mean that you're not gonna have a contract and people won't get a wage step or that type of thing. It just means you haven't negotiated it yet. So, as we talk about next year's budget, this is traditionally what I would do unless we get a contract for next year done very quickly. I wouldn't put anything in there. Now I wouldn't know what the cost would be, so you know it ahead of time, that we're gonna need to have X amount if we follow the traditional contract language. But
Oh, I'm sorry.
but I just, my recommendation, I wouldn't put that in there because we haven't negotiated it.
And speak to the law on that part, what we can't do as a district.
Well, I know that there's rules on even retro pay. I've been out of the game for 18 months, but I think that there is stuff, if you don't have a contract in place, there is things that are lost by whatever bargaining unit that is. So you want to get them to the table, you want to get things solved as early as possible and get things ratified. You don't want things dragging on for beyond the start of the school year, because then it becomes very problematic.
And the teachers don't recoup that money back. So,
Oh, yeah.
or the staff, period. So they can't do retro pay back.
Actually, that's negotiable now.
It behooves,
Well, see, I'm on the game, so.
So, again, it behooves everyone to want to get to the table and negotiate it so that teachers are made whole and everyone else, so that you don't have to look at negotiating that retro and all of that. Because those are dollars that you want to solidify for the staff.
And the law may have changed, that's something to look at, but previously, that was the rule, you couldn't do that. Right?
Is there a reason why you don't use the previous year's step calculation in order to just put it in the budget? To cover at least the basic?
If there's a contract, I'd do it 100%, but if there's not a contract, I would not put it in there because there isn't a contract. And you're actually negotiating in public by saying, we're gonna do this and this and this, and it hasn't been decided yet.
Right.
Now, there's districts that budget it, they do, it's just my philosophy. There's nothing, and if something happens where the district can't afford to do it, and it happens in July, but it's already in the budget, now you gotta take it out of the budget, I think that's almost more problematic, so. That's just my personal philosophy. I did it here, and I did it in my previous district. I did not put money in the budget if there was no contract. Nothing was
You
put
could
in there.
ratify a contract too that has more than what you budgeted,
Right.
Of course, yeah.
and there's an issue. So it's good to get at the table and get it done, so you know what to budget instead of anticipating or assuming.
I think I talked about most of this, at least somewhat. We talked about the special ed. These are, I think, straightforward. I usually budget 50 students a year. I don't know if that's still proper. I know we had some big increases here, and it varies, obviously. Sometimes the winter from the fall is totally different. So, but generally I would put 2 teachers in for growth in the budget, so we can see if that is where we want to go. This is, again, older information, but it just shows the cap, healthcare cap, I mentioned it earlier, that is dictated by the state of Michigan. These will obviously be updated for this next year. But again, we won't put that in the budget unless I won't unless I'm directed to, or we have a contract in place. Similar thing, you want to make sure that you have benefit costs. If you have new positions, you want to make sure you have money in there for that type of thing also.
Did health costs go up this year too?
I'm sorry?
Health costs went up?
They go up every year. The cap, I think, went up to maybe 3%. I'm not sure. I have to ask Mike Emerson.
This year.
But I think that's for the calendar year, so we have to do a weighted average, I think. This is real small, you can't really see it, but this just shows the complexity. And this is a summary of the retirement rates. There's actually a page before this that is way more complex, which includes matching funds, not matching funds. Back in the day, it was really easy to budget for retirement costs. Now it depends on what bucket employees are in. Are they doing matching funds or not? So again, this is something that's a little bit more difficult to do. But the key is to look at what you spent last year, at least as a comparison to what you think and what the new rates are that the ORS comes out with. I mentioned this stuff pretty much. Diane does primarily the grant budget. She's very good at it. Mentioned the tan before. Yep. So I would always traditionally recommend things that can help balance the budget. There's times in my 27 years when the Great Recession happened, in South Line, we ate in the fund balance. We did it consciously. We're going to try to, we call it a soft landing. We're going to try to eat into a little bit, there's enough in there, and try to ride this thing out. And that's what the fund balance is for. But you want to, we had 10 years in a row of surplus in this district when I left. And maybe it's a coincidence, but it's important to continue to have at least $1 more than you're bringing in. And it just, you don't want to run a structural deficit longer than necessary. All right, and it froze on me. There we go. So SFE builds the budget along with the business office. I know that they've had a lot of challenges with the staffing shortage. We had supply chain issues. We had cost escalation. It's been very difficult. Again, I haven't been here away. I've been away 18 months, but it sounds like there's still a lot of these challenges. So I know that.
They've changed management, though. Supervisors.
Yes, still the same company, but they have different people.
Same people within there. They got rid of some people within their own group. No longer have the same managers and chefs and stuff like that. That has changed. Student activity, pretty straightforward, similar to the revenue discussion. Bond debt, just mentioned that again. We're having the sale of bond series 3, which will be, the debt fund will be $325. And part of the process working with Baird is to make sure that we stay within the 2 mils, which is, we're looking at all that stuff right now, and we're fine with that. This shows our debt amortization. Now this shows the series 1 in this column. This is series 2. And this is the last of the general fund debt that we have. The state of Michigan forgave the $19 million or so. So come 2030, we will no longer have any general fund debt anymore. It'll just be bond debt, so that'll be wonderful. And hopefully by then this tan will be 0 too. That'd be really nice to have only stuff in this column. I mentioned with the sinking fund, it's important to set aside money in there for repairs because we can't pay for repairs out of the bond issue. But there is, and again, I go back to, I found this old retreat from December 23, and we talked about using sinking fund dollars, $11 million, to help support the bond project. So that has been something that was discussed many times at retreats and at the board level. And there is a lot of money sitting in the sinking fund. And that needs to be accessed to keep things moving forward. Now we're going to sell bonds, we'll have more money coming in with the bonds, but this was, unless you guys change direction, this was always part of the plan to make sure we support these building projects.
How much is in there now? Is it,
I think it's about 10 million right now.
and then once you sell the bonds, it'll be more.
Well, it'll be in a different bucket, but yeah, once we sell the bonds.
You'll have some flexibility.
Yep. Risk related, we already talked about that. So, well, here's the actual number: 856 to 208. So that's 648. So it was reduced. Wage questions to ask: our wage, is the formula being used? Is the current tax base being used? How is the total budget of teacher salaries compared to the current staffing list? Is everybody accounted for? Do you have the vacancies budget? We mentioned that earlier. And adjusting for contracted costs, which I mentioned is a challenge. New staffing requests, those been approved prior to going into the budget request that goes to the board for their approval. Have healthcare budgets costs been incorporated? Can't forget dental vision and the other costs are small, but they add up to quite a big chunk. The ORS contribution, are we using the proper formula for that? And the other stuff we kind of talked questions to ask: is the budgeted TAN expenditure equal to previous year's TAN revenue? Because it has to be. So that's something to look at in the budget and budget reports. And one side thing, I know the district was very good at using cooperatives to save money for purchasing items. Could be just something to make sure that we're continuing to use cooperatives. I know Amazon has a program for schools that are used, and there's Oakland County does a bid that you can get stuff through them at a low cost too. Our grant budgets and balance. Making sure that people are charged for the correct grant. And what is the plan if a grant's going away? What are you going to do with those staffing costs? Are they going away, or are you moving them to another fund? So this is my budgeting philosophy. I guess 8,000 account numbers, but that probably includes assets and liabilities too. So again, a lot of change. It's very difficult to manage. There's a lot going on, and of course you're not always privy in the business office of stuff that's going on. Unknowns that may or may not happen. It's important to track. I mentioned the monthly financial report's a great vehicle that should be given to the board. It's really an early warning system. Not only is it good for the board, it's good for the CFO, because by doing this, you're like, wait a second, we're kind of behind so far in our revenues for property taxes. What gives? Do we have to reduce our budget for that, or was there a business that got a big tax reduction that we weren't aware of? So it's really meant to be an early warning system for not only the board, for administration. And I always tried to keep budgets the same for the non-people costs best we could, and just try to get departments to just do a little more work and getting that good pricing, that type of thing. And this is what I said back in, I didn't change any of this stuff. So as I said this 2 years ago, it's good to start evaluating department operations to ensure we're running as efficiently, as effectively as possible. And so I know that's being done. I know that there's, especially like in the custodial, there's unique approaches now to save money, things like that. So that's good to do that. 10-year financial forecast. I think the board should have one every year. The CFO should be providing that to you. And I know that there's a lot of unknowns, but still, if it's based on logical assumptions, it allows you to say, wait a second, we got a problem in year 4. What can we do to fix that now? It's a good tool to have, and I think that should be part of what is expected to do that. And again, you get multiple forecasts. And I would imagine with the grants, it might be good, and we're a ways away from this type of level, but we got to get next year's budget in place first. But to look at what's a long-term effect of losing federal money. Is there a plan that we can put in place if that were to happen? Okay. So open discussion. This is a lot smaller of a presentation. We're getting close. We've done a lot. We've caught up a bit there. Just talks about how the budget gets amended. Normally it's amended usually in December and then at the end of the year. You can amend it as long as you want, as much as you want. It is a very intensive labor project to process to develop the budget amendment, going through all the line items. So it does take a lot of time. So two usually is the amount of time amendments districts are using. Come on. So budgets must be approved by June 30th. The board must hold a public hearing prior to approval of tax rates as well as the proposed budget. Public hearing is usually held the first meeting in June. And the reason that's important is later in the meeting, the board would adopt the millage rates because municipalities are screaming already in early June, give us the rates, because they have to prepare the tax bills, they want to know what's going to be. So usually the board would have the public hearing, later in that meeting, adopt the tax rates, and then the next meeting in June, they would adopt the budget, which again is still within the June 30th deadline. So this is all new information, things I was just throwing in there, letting you know what I'm going to be, the approach I'm taking. I talked about how I'm going to develop the tax revenues. I'm going to look at current year trends. get current information on that stuff. Look at the state, I've been looking at the state aid status reports. I'm gonna be hearing what the different budget proposals are for next year, so I need to know that in order to find out what the impact might be for Pontiac. Work with Diane on the federal grants. Again, a lot of unpredictability there. You know, yeah, there could be, the feds may just reduce the amount of money altogether. They may actually reduce the amount of money and give the states the money, and then the states can change their formula. They might change who gets what. So there's all sorts of things in play that could drastically impact the Pontiac School District. The tax anticipation note mentioned that also a couple times. So staffing, again, because of, if there isn't a contract in place, I wouldn't put steps or any increase in there. So, and obviously retirement would go up based on the new schedule. And then we'd have the open positions before. But I would try to keep the operating budgets at the bottom there, frozen at current levels, just as we move forward in the first draft of the budget. I think that's a reasonable approach. And if there is a department that needs more, they have to super justify why they need more money in a certain, and this is non-people costs. This would be like supplies and stuff like that. So non-discretionary costs, obviously utilities, in-place contracts, stuff like that. We have to build in, if there's a cost increase for those, that has to be built into the budget. And obviously, if there is something broke, you got to fix it. And then there's the transfers between athletics and risk-related, talked about earlier. So food service, I kind of mentioned this already, but work with them to develop a budget for next year. And that may not be something that we can do in the next 2 weeks, but that is something that we'll have to work with them to do.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
can we go back?
sure.
How did the food service run a deficit of 26? Is that just 1,000, or what is that?
Yeah, 26,000. Yeah. Again, the challenges I mentioned earlier, the food service fund is very thin, runs very thin, and that's why it's so important to make sure we count every kid, that kitchens are operational, that because the staff are trained, all that kind of stuff, and I do think, based on just a high level view of it, it is better, and hopefully that will continue. But that is again, we the day to day we have to lean on SFE to make sure that they're counting the kids and that they're serving up a healthy.
That was an issue back then, the amount of kids that were eating, the inability to count the amount of kids that were eating. They ran into that problem.
Yes.
They told us when we brought in them again,
100%.
management, that a lot of that stuff was rectified. That's what they told us way back in the beginning in the fall.
So they have to get the machines to.
Yeah,
get-
IDs, different stuff.
I believe that's been rectified too.
That's what they said. They told us that in the
Yeah.
beginning. But that was some of the issue on why the deficit. Wasted food.
So one of the things of the high school kitchen is waiting. It takes forever to get state inspections. He said that'll be wonderful to have that brought back online. It will help them with their operations. Talked about that. Talked about these 2 mills, sinking fund. Similar to talked about that. This is kind of similar information, risk related. Talked about that. So I apologize. Some of this is redundant. So I mentioned this kind of stuff earlier about the structural deficit. So moving target, I mentioned some difficulty with budgeting earlier. The open positions, the impact on contracted positions, all the staff movement. The fourth one is a big one, grant revenue recognition. If we don't draw the grant monies and get it back within 60 days of year end, we can't count it as revenue. There's always a certain portion that goes beyond 60 days because in the old days, you could draw for stuff you haven't paid for yet. But they changed those rules quite a few years ago. Now you actually have to physically pay this stuff out before you can get a draw. So if you pay teachers in July and August for their 26 pays, and you pay somebody October 21st, now you try to draw down, you may not get that money by the end of August. So that sometimes can be a big number, and it could blow the budget. And it's really nobody's fault. So that does, year to year, that does happen. And it's important to budget for a certain amount of that, honestly. But then, if you have a chunk that you get after the 60 days, that's kind of extra money in the following year. But you have to treat that as one-time money, because it's just money you should have got the year before. It's not like new money, now we can add teachers. It's just, it's just the fiscal year kind of overlap of those two. So I'm going to I'm leaving May 7th. I'm getting on a plane. It was supposed to be tomorrow. I delayed my Europe trip for 2 weeks, and my wife still doesn't speak to me as much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Because I knew how much had to happen here, honestly. And I worked pretty hard for 4 years, and I want to make sure it's successful. So I want to do my part.
She'll just get her purse and some shoes. She'll be all right. But you buy some purse and some shoes from Europe, she good.
No.
Been there, done that.
No, doesn't work with everybody.
So the goal is to have a draft budget by May 7th, and I don't know if it's just the retirement haze. I just think I can do it, so I'm hoping I can. But that's what I'm working.
Yeah, you can.
But basically, the nice thing about having it done early like that, it gives really a full month to tweak it, right? Because there'll be things that will happen after May 7th, right?
Yeah.
And there is somebody that's being brought in to help while I'm gone. I'll get back June 17th, but at that point, the budget needs to be adopted. So, I mean, it needs to be moved forward. So, but I'll be happy to help a little bit in July and August. That's kind of the end of my sunset to make sure the new person understands what we've done before. And again, everybody has their own way of doing things, but I want them to at least understand how it was done, and then they can tweak it. And again, the budget's very dynamic; it changes all the time. And when you have thousands and thousands of account numbers, and this is my concern, that if you start scrutinizing an account number that's out of whack, and there's 4,000 of them, you'll lose the forest through the trees. I mean, it's an art form in science. You have to make sure you know the overall picture. And I don't care if I'm a little bit short in one salary account, and if I have extra over there, I'm fine. You don't want to constantly be moving stuff over. You need to know the big picture. So, just my caution is, if you try not to get into that level of why is this account wrong? Why is there money spent? And sometimes it might simply be a journal entry is going to happen to move that money out of there and somewhere else. So you want to stay at the high level, because you want to make sure the ship is not heading towards the iceberg, basically.
But Jim, I am going to ask questions if $700,000 or $1 million. So come on, man. Okay, that's
fair enough.
That's all
fair
I'm saying.
enough.
I just want you to know that I am going to ask. $700,000, I'm going to ask. I think I should. Thank you.
So this is the sinking fund. This actually is fresh off the press here. I did talk to the bond council. They developed a schedule here for next year's for the November ballot. So this is what has to happen. We got plenty of time, but this is what has to happen to have that ballot question on that ballot, and just it has to happen. All right, monthly financial report. Thank you for staying with me here. This is the cash flow through February. You can see $38 million. So we're in a wonderful cash position. We are making a lot of money in interest. We never had that money before. We used to have money leave because we were paying interest on stuff.
Yep.
We have flipped that narrative, and now we're making a lot of money on interest.
That's good.
That's real.
This shows the cash flow, and again, very healthy compared to prior years, especially. It's still tracking very good, but you can see the cash flow, with and without the tan. I always like to show that. Trustee Trustee
pie
Gross,
chart.
here's your pie chart, so. Total revenues to date, about 75 million. About 5.6 million received in February. Spending, about 72 million out, about 6.4 million in February that was spent. This to me is probably the most important chart actually. This is the income statement.
Yep.
I'm going to explain what this means and what it really means. There's a big difference. So local revenue, we're a little bit behind in property taxes. I think we're okay. I'm looking at the numbers. With the Second Amendment, I will drop that budget down probably $400,000 though, because I think that needs to be, there are a lot of people appealing taxes, things like that are happening. So again, the early warning sign, right? It caused us to look at that. I think that probably needs to go down a little bit. State, a little bit lower, but last year we had the payoff of the debt, the $19 million. That's why that was so high, because we paid that out last year. So you really can't compare these two necessarily as being a problem. Federal's pretty close, other financing is pretty close. So revenues, I think I'm comfortable with the exception of reducing that budget there a little bit. Salaries, we had a big payment this August, right? A big retention pay, right? That skewed these numbers, I believe, and why we're at 70% because of that big pay. Excuse me. Benefits, it looks like we might be, I'm going to look at that budget, maybe we can reduce that expenditure a little bit. Yeah, dig a little more into that. Capital outlay, we paid for the buses, right? I think in February to pay the buses, I believe that's what that is, for the $9 million we got last year for the electric bus rebate. So all in all, I think this looks okay, I guess, but it's always important to kind of dig into if there's a discrepancy, what's causing it. Oops. Food service, we are a little bit behind with posting, which isn't unusual. I've been looking at the report from their report, SFE's report. I'm comfortable at where we're at with that report. So this is a little bit deferred, but we'll catch up with it.
Jim, why would food service have to give $100,000 back to the general fund?
It's pretty common practice that that food service contribute to the general fund. My previous district, we had a payment, $100,000, a little bit arbitrary, was really what SFE gave as part of when they had the contract here. That's what they put in their document, that they would move to, transfer that over. So it can be any number, but it's not unusual to have some type of, and there are costs that district supports food service that aren't necessarily in the budget for food service. So you can really kind of say that $100,000 helps to support staff that are doing the drawdowns and things like that are directly related to the food service program.
So the food service is allocated X amount of dollars to run. This is a question.
Mm-hmm.
So facilitate my thinking because I'm in a quandary, as to why they would give money back to the general fund. If they've been allocated a budget, why would they in turn take $100,000 out of what they've been able to do and give it back, opposed to utilizing that $100,000 to improve something on their end, give better food, do something? I'm just
right. That is something certainly the board can pursue that. I will say that when the we bid it out, food service, every vendor has a number in there that they contribute to the general fund to cover some of those indirect costs as part of the industry. You don't have to have them do that though. If the board decides in the budget they don't want the $100,000 to be transferred, they want to leave it in the program, that is something you can do.
Is that customary to,
Yes.
with most districts, to take or receive the money from their food service department back into their general fund?
Yes, if it's a third party, absolutely. Yep. But there is a limit. I think it's 15% is the max you can do. So this is underneath.
Just trying to.
Yeah, underneath that. And then I won't go through all these, but I am going to now add these cash flows for all these other funds, so you have those too. So not only are you getting monthly reports, you're getting more stuff. And so, won't be my problem, it'll be somebody else's problem.
Can we get this in copy form? Can you send this electronic?
I think it was sent electronic.
I missed it. Okay, that's fine. I have it.
Yes.
I'm missing a lot of stuff.
Okay.
I didn't see it, but that's what I thought, but okay.
Yeah, I didn't see it. No.
Okay, so other information for, there was no emergency purchases the last 2 months. These are the things that have to happen by May, June. I talked about a number of these. A lot of these are, they're all kind of in process right now. I'm actually meeting with SETSEG, the property casualty renewal tomorrow with the remote. Working with, getting a little tired here. Who's our, Baird, working with Baird on this, selling the TAN and selling the bond. So that's all moving forward, and we'll progress with this. And we got through 155 slides, so congratulations. Any other last minute questions? That was a lot, but again, purpose is for you to have that. You can refer back to, especially the questions in the future to ask CFOs and all that kind of stuff. Yes?
So I still have my thing from last week, so the only thing that's updated are the current new numbers, but as far as the report,
Yeah,
essentially.
99% of it's the same.
Thank you.
Okay.
Steve, any other questions?
Do we need another study session? Ms. Brown is leaving?
Well, we're gonna have we have our board retreat, and we're gonna look at I know we said we should
Retreat is
have
in
a
May?
draft of the budget on May 5th, and then we have our retreat May 14th. So we will have another discussion of this budget and go through everything there.
Well, the reason why I brought the report tonight, because Monday I'd rather be working on stuff, honestly, than driving 2 hours round trip. So I literally need every moment I can to work on this stuff. So I don't know if I'd be available before May 7th, but somebody would be able to. I would make sure that they can speak to everything that's very knowledgeable.
Yeah. Retreat is May 14th? Yes. 14th.
Has it been sent out for a calendar?
All right, any other questions for Jim?